Welcome everyone to this webinar on migrants and COVID-19 emerging practices. I am Nancy Landa, technical advisor of the pilot project Skills for Reintegration based in Mexico with GIZ. It is my pleasure to facilitate this webinar today. Before we start, I would like to tell you that this webinar will be held in Spanish and primarily in English, but we have a presentation in Spanish. So we will have a simultaneous translation. Our first panelist will begin with the presentation in Spanish. So we take a moment here to share with you some of the steps to access the app Interprefy. So for our English speakers, we recommend that you do this setup as we go through the introduction so you can hear the translation in English if you need that for our first presentation. You can access this app from the web browser or from if you download it to an app on your phone. Here we have the link and we also included the instructions on the chat. So you can access that. There's a token or password that you enter after you click on the link and you select the English option, so you'll be able to hear that audio. Let me just briefly switch to Spanish so I can also explain the step to our Spanish speakers. Next slide. Buenos días para quienes nos acompañan, quienes son hispanoparlantes. Nomás quería compartirles antes de empezar la presentación que este webinario va a estar primordialmente en inglés, pero tenemos una presentación en español y tenemos una traducción simultánea. Aquí les compartimos los pasos para poder acceder a ella con el link a la app de Interprefy, que lo pueden acceder desde un navegador o si bajan la aplicación en su celular. Aquí les incluimos la clave y seleccionan el canal de español para poder escuchar la traducción a español. También tenemos las instrucciones en el chat y mientras seguimos con la introducción, espero que se den la oportunidad de poder acceder a la aplicación. Gracias. Next. So first of all, I would like to introduce the series and framework in which we organize the webinar today. This is the 18th webinar of the Social Protection Responses to COVID-19 webinar series. The series is a joint effort initiated by IPC, IG, GIZ on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ, and the Australia Government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, in collaboration with socialprotection.org platform and in cooperation with partners from different organizations. The webinar series is part of an initiative with two other major components, a collaborative mapping of country news and documents disseminated weekly through a dedicated newsletter and an online community on the topic to systematize information and foster discussion. You can join the online community, Social Protection Responses on COVID Task Force, to learn more about the whole initiative and to find how to collaborate and keep updated on future webinars. Briefly, on the next slide, we highlight some of the upcoming webinars on the social protection responses to COVID-19. There will be one taking place on July 2nd and another one on July 7th. The first one will focus on issues of universal health coverage and adaptation to cash transfers in Latin America. So don't forget to register to those webinars. So now I move forward to introduce our panelists for today. We have representatives from India and Ecuador and also Mexico to provide a diverse perspective on the subject today on migrants and the impact on COVID and also emerging responses to expand social protection. So first, I would like to introduce Gabriela Benitez from World Vision Ecuador Humanitarian Response Manager. She's a local development professional with special interest in facilitating community empowerment processes with profound knowledge on risk management and humanitarian and emergency affairs. In 2016, Gabriela led the World Vision's humanitarian actions in response to the 7.8 earthquake that occurred on April 2016. And since 2018, Gabriela has coordinated World Vision's emergency response related to the Venezuelan migrant crisis. She's currently leading the emergency response related to COVID-19. Next, we have with us Rajiv Bahal, Director, Natural Resources Management and Agroecology from GIZ India. where he leads a key bilateral project on water security and climate adaptation in rural India, along with a host of other projects on issues of rural development, social protection, sustainable farming, among many others. Rajiv offers over 33 years of experience in working with international agencies, governments, and the private sector in India and African countries on these issues, as well as participatory foreign management and livelihood development initiatives. So thank you for joining us. And lastly, we have Virginia Negro. She's a specialist for the Western Hemisphere Regional Migration Program for the International Organization on Migration, the IOM. There, she leads a range of projects that promote labor integration of migrants, supporting the execution of national and multilateral labor migration schemes. She also offers in-depth knowledge of the migration field and has coordinated consultancies aimed at developing and implementing public policies to guarantee fair and safe human mobility and also migrants' rights to work. She has been an international consultant for UNICEF and the Association of the European Border Regions, developing international cooperation projects in Mexico, Argentina, and Jerusalem. She will be a discussant for this panel. And lastly, myself, this is the second webinar I facilitate that explores this nexus on migration, forced displacement, and social protection. I manage a project with GIZ that works on strengthening networks and partnerships to facilitate the integration and reintegration of migrants, returnees, and refugees and other forcibly displaced persons in Mexico. And we also facilitate interregional dialogues between key actors. Next, I would like to just share with you that the agenda, which after this introduction, each panelist will have 15 minutes to present. And we are planning to have a Q&A session at the end, hopefully about 30 minutes if we keep on with track with time. So we encourage the audience to send questions to the panelists throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to address them during the Q&A session of the webinar. You can either submit them in English or Spanish, and I'll be able to direct them to the panel. So with that, I would like to introduce the webinar. This is the third webinar in the social protection series that focuses on the nexus of social protection and forced displacement and migration, where we had looked at the conditions that make people on the move specifically vulnerable to the health and socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19. Here we highlight some of, and there's a link also to the other two webinars that deal with migration and forced displacement. And these webinars attempted to highlight emerging practices as part of the shock responsive social protection measures aimed at increasing benefits, or we looked at this vertical expansion to core beneficiaries, or also expanding coverage to those most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but who are generally not beneficiaries of regular social protection programs, or what we explore in the last webinar on emerging field practices with horizontal expansion. And this is primarily the case for people on the move. Next slide. And sort of continuing or reminding you of this framework of social protection, which has been explored in this webinar series on the second webinar, sharing with you this visual on the key pillars that we visualize social protection. These webinars that we facilitated have primarily focused on emerging practices that cover social assistance, primarily cash transfers, food, and in-kind assistance. On the webinar on June 16, we had experiences from Pakistan, Morocco, Rwanda, Colombia, and today we'll explore Ecuador and India. And also labor market policies, which we explore livelihood, promoting livelihood. So this is primarily the India case, and so we wanted to place the emerging practices that we are highlighting in this framework on social protection. Next. So today we'll have an opportunity to hear from experts from Latin America and South Asian regions who are working on innovative field practices to promote inclusion and expand coverage in social assistance and securing livelihoods options for migrants and their families. And before that, I just want to highlight some of the general context of primarily for migrant workers and their families, where according also to latest ILO statistics, we have 166 million international migrant workers worldwide, representing 4.7% of the global labor pool. However, in many countries and regions, migrant workers represent a larger share of the workforce, carrying out many essential jobs, including in the service industry, construction, agriculture, and agro-food processing. And we'll see that in more detail on the country experiences that we have from Ecuador and India. As we shared on the previous webinar, there's also increased vulnerability for migrant workers as they are concentrated in sectors of the economy with high levels of temporary, informal, and unprotected work, and in many times precarious conditions such as low wages and worsening working conditions. And oftentimes, not only migrant workers, but many people on the move and in forced displacement, they're often excluded from national COVID-19 policy responses. But at the end, we wanted to find examples where we have migrant inclusive responses. And so we'll hear about that in this seminar, in this webinar. Next slide. So now that I have introduced the webinar, I would like to invite Gabriela Benitez to showcase the experience of World Vision implementing cash assistance in response to COVID-19 in Ecuador. Again, she will be doing her presentation in Spanish. So for our English speakers, hopefully you have already set up Interprefy. And so I share with you the floor. Gabriela, te invito para que nos puedas compartir tu presentación.
Gracias. Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Okay. Gracias en primer lugar por el espacio. Creo que es interesante tener estos espacios de compartir experiencias en relación a cómo muchas organizaciones estamos abordando y respondiendo ante esta crisis sanitaria. En cuanto al contexto del país, rápidamente quisiera comentarles algunos puntos importantes. En el mes de marzo, el gobierno del Ecuador declaró emergencia sanitaria y un estado de excepción nacional para mitigar la propagación del virus. Se suspendieron inmediatamente todas las actividades presenciales y todo tipo de eventos públicos. Se suspendió también el Sistema Nacional de Educación, transporte público, se cerraron los aeropuertos y las fronteras, se restringe la movilización de vehículos e individuos a nivel nacional. También se implementa un toque de queda para motivar al confinamiento de las personas y de las familias. Es importante saber que Ecuador, con alrededor de 17 millones de habitantes, es uno de los países más afectados de Latinoamérica, afectados por el COVID-19. Según las cifras oficiales del Ministerio de Salud, hasta el día de ayer, 29 de junio, en Ecuador se han reportado 55.665 casos confirmados de COVID, de los cuales tenemos 4.502 fallecimientos relacionados a este virus. Ecuador es el país de Latinoamérica con la mayor tasa de mortalidad por millones de habitantes, precedido por Brasil, que obviamente tiene una población mucho mayor de 12 veces. Brasil tiene una población 12 veces mayor que Ecuador. Would you please change? Thank you. Thank you very much. Después de esto, a partir del mes de mayo, entonces Ecuador viene y relaja estas medidas de confinamiento e inicia un proceso de transición de la etapa de aislamiento a la fase de distanciamiento, como una estrategia para iniciar la reactivación del sector productivo del país, ya que obviamente la economía se ve muy afectada. Según un estudio de la Cámara de Comercio de Quito, el 82% de las compañías operan solamente al 30%, y de su capacidad instalada. después de esto, solamente el 1.7% de empresas están trabajando al 100%. 84 empresas privadas han reportado, obviamente, una reducción importante en sus ventas. 35.3 han reducido su rol de pagos, es decir, su nómina del año, y el 70% de compañías no han generado ingresos durante la emergencia, lo cual obviamente es preocupante y definitivamente afecta muy fuerte el tema de los ingresos de las empresas. Además de esto, y adicional a los efectos de la pandemia, también tuvimos una paralización importante en el sector petrolero del país debido a una ruptura de unos oleoductos. Hubo un colapso de los precios del petróleo que bajaron drásticamente y de otros productos principales de exportación del Ecuador, lo cual obviamente generó problemas muy fuertes fiscales y de liquidez a nivel país. El gobierno del Ecuador, con el fin de atender a la población más vulnerable afectada por esta crisis, implementa un proyecto social, un proyecto de protección social que tiene como intención asistir a la población más vulnerable. Entonces, es así que durante los meses de abril, mayo y junio, el gobierno entrega unos bonos de protección, unos bonos emergentes a 950,000 familias ecuatorianas, especialmente direccionado este beneficio a las familias que dependen de actividades informales económicas, como por ejemplo la venta de productos en las calles, y que obviamente esto les genera un ingreso de día a día. Entonces, este bono se realizó en 2 fases. El primero se entregó en dos ocasiones durante 2 meses por un valor de $60 cada uno, y la segunda fase, que es el bono de protección familiar, se hace una entrega entonces de un bono de $120. Ahora bien, ¿cómo esta situación afecta ya mucho más a las familias migrantes que se encuentran en nuestro país? Es importante recordar que antes de la pandemia en Ecuador, inclusive tuvimos 2 eventos fuertes también que afectó mucho el componente social y económico del país, que fueron unas movilizaciones nacionales debido a medidas económicas adoptadas por el gobierno. Entonces, ya las familias ecuatorianas y migrantes venían ya recibiendo estos golpes muy fuertes para su economía, lo cual se agrava mucho más con la situación de la pandemia y del COVID-19. Entonces, la situación actual de los migrantes y refugiados de nuestro país, en primer lugar, son familias en situación de vulnerabilidad incrementada debido a la emergencia sanitaria, obviamente, expuestas a todo tipo de abusos y explotación. Tenemos cientos de familias en situación de calle que han sido desalojadas de sus viviendas, evidentemente por no tener la capacidad de cubrir los costos de los arriendos. Se ha incrementado también la inseguridad alimentaria de las familias, ya que no tienen capacidad de cubrir las necesidades básicas de alimentación, lo cual es muy preocupante, y para World Vision mucho más considerando nuestro enfoque de niñez y adolescencia. Hay cientos de familias con niños y adolescentes que evidentemente están haciendo tal vez una comida al día con suerte debido a la falta de ingresos. La pandemia ha precipitado el retorno de miles de familias a su país. Tenemos cientos de familias y miles de familias caminantes que tratan de llegar a las fronteras para retornar a su país. Obviamente están expuestos a todo tipo de riesgos, no solo al riesgo de contagio, porque tampoco tienen acceso a las medidas mínimas de bioprotección o de protección personal. Entonces están expuestos mucho más a una serie de riesgos. Tampoco tienen acceso a las ayudas sociales que está otorgando el gobierno. Como les comenté, el gobierno implementó estos bonos emergentes, pero están destinados específicamente para familias ecuatorianas. Por lo tanto, las familias migrantes se quedan fuera y no tienen ninguna posibilidad de acceder a estos programas del gobierno, como son las canastas de alimentos y también estos bonos en efectivo que se han entregado. Y por supuesto, al estar nuestro sistema de salud colapsado, las familias venezolanas, las familias migrantes tienen mucha más limitación o tienen un limitado acceso a poder acceder a estos servicios de salud en caso de contagio, en caso de todas las enfermedades, pero mucho más en caso de contagio de COVID. Next, please. Otra preocupación muy fuerte que tenemos como World Vision y a nivel país son los niños en situación de movilidad humana que no tienen un acceso garantizado a la educación. Como el sistema de educación se ha suspendido y se están manteniendo todas las clases de manera virtual, entonces esto también es una limitación muy grande para estas familias, ya que obviamente no pueden acceder siempre al tema de conectividad, a equipos tecnológicos, por ejemplo, que son imprescindibles para poder continuar la educación en esta modalidad virtual. Lo que hace que muchos de los niños ahora estén saliendo con sus padres nuevamente a la calle a vender artículos, a tratar de hacer alguna actividad económica, obviamente para tener algún tipo de ingreso, pero es muy preocupante porque tenemos niños trabajando inclusive en la calle. También hay un incremento importante de la discriminación y xenofobia, según OIM. Antes de la pandemia ya el 55% de la población venezolana sentía discriminación, lo cual en esta época ha incrementado. Definitivamente se ve a la población migrante como un foco de contaminación o de infección o de contagio, lo cual es preocupante. Como les comentaba, no tienen acceso a los ítems mínimos de protección, por lo tanto, las comunidades de acogida los miran como un riesgo, los miran como que son personas que pueden propagar el contagio. Entonces, eso ha hecho que se incremente la discriminación y la xenofobia hacia esta población. Entonces, en el marco de esta emergencia y en el marco de estas realidades, World Vision viene realizando intervenciones de diferente tipo para poder dar asistencia a estas familias. Next slide, please. Thank you. A partir de la crisis sanitaria, entonces World Vision implementa intervenciones basadas en cash, también en especie, en los siguientes sectores. En seguridad alimentaria, que es uno de las necesidades principales de las familias a través de tarjetas de alimentación, por ejemplo. También se realizan entregas en especie en algunos casos, y estas entregas o estos beneficios se han realizado con fondos propios. También hemos implementado proyectos financiados por el PMA en varias ciudades del país, lo cual definitivamente ha sido una ayuda importante para estas familias. En temas de WASH también se han realizado intervenciones a través de entregas en especie, de tarjetas, para que las personas puedan tener acceso a estos implementos mínimos de saneamiento, de higiene para su familia, para sus hogares, para sus espacios y de desinfección. Entonces, esto también ha sido importante. Todo esto viene acompañado de un proceso de capacitación, de sensibilización, para que las familias tengan una información importante que puedan aplicar, como es el lavado de manos, el correcto lavado de manos, a través de videos, de mensajes. También se maneja el tema de salud, se ha incorporado un componente de salud, y lo mismo se ha logrado a través de la entrega de efectivo para los casos de salud. El cash multipropósito, que definitivamente ha sido muy efectivo porque permite a las familias priorizar sus necesidades más importantes y obviamente decidir en qué están invirtiendo estos recursos que se les ha entregado. Y también hemos realizado entrega de cash o intervenciones en cash para el tema de reactivación económica, medios de vida y microemprendimientos, que en esta fase de la crisis sanitaria definitivamente es un componente que debe abordarse con mucha más fuerza. En una primera instancia se realizó ya la entrega de artículos emergentes, pero ahora lo que viene es justamente abordar estas necesidades de las familias de retomar o de reactivar su economía de alguna manera. Ahora, ¿cómo nosotros hemos logrado hacer esta intervención en temas de reactivación económica? A través de la conformación de grupos de ahorro, por ejemplo, que es una iniciativa que ha dado muy buenos resultados. Lo importante de esto es también que nosotros hacemos estas intervenciones incorporando población migrante y población de acogida, justamente para reducir las tensiones que ya existen entre ambas poblaciones. Entonces, esto hace también que realmente sea un proceso de inclusión. Conformación de grupos de ahorro solidarios, por ejemplo. También la conformación de asociaciones productivas entre población migrante y población de acogida. Todo esto viene acompañado de un proceso también de capacitación interesante en cuanto, por ejemplo, al tema de temas de tributación, temas de legislación, la formalización como tal de la asociación o de los microemprendimientos. Entonces es todo un proceso que las familias tienen antes de llegar a este punto de conformación de asociaciones también. Y el tercer punto importante que hemos manejado es el apoyo, obviamente, a microemprendimientos, que quiere decir la reactivación económica, apoyo a nuevos emprendimientos y también la mejora de algunos que ya existen. Igualmente, en este caso, de la misma manera, las familias tienen un proceso de capacitación, de sensibilización, para que puedan obviamente invertir de manera adecuada y productiva sus recursos, pero también sepan cómo funciona, por ejemplo, un emprendimiento, cuáles son los permisos que necesitan para el funcionamiento de estos emprendimientos. Entonces, eso les facilita mucho. Tenemos iniciativas muy importantes que están caminando. Definitivamente, esta crisis nos ha hecho no solo a World Vision, sino a todas las organizaciones pensar en nuevas maneras de trabajar, como por ejemplo, envío de información a través de medios virtuales, envío de información o de temas importantes a través de WhatsApp, de Internet, porque definitivamente no podemos hacer muchas actividades de manera presencial, ¿no es cierto? Nuestros equipos están dotados de los equipos de protección personal necesario y de bioseguridad para poder hacer las actividades, pero realmente ha sido un reto importante para todas las organizaciones y ha sido muy importante la coordinación también entre organizaciones, no solo entre ONGs y fundaciones de diferente tipo que trabajan en el país, pero también con los gobiernos locales. Esto nos ha permitido ser efectivos y oportunos en las asistencias y también derivar y permitir que todos tengan acceso a los diferentes servicios. Para World Vision, además, es importante incluir un componente de protección y todas nuestras acciones tienen como un tema transversal el tema de protección y de que las familias también sepan cuáles son las rutas de protección que ellos pueden seguir en caso de vulneración de derechos de sus niños, niñas y adolescentes. Eso es lo que les puedo compartir en términos generales del trabajo que World Vision está haciendo y en general de las ONGs en Ecuador en el marco de esta emergencia sanitaria. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Gabriela. Esperamos poder profundizar más sobre estas intervenciones también en el intercambio de preguntas y respuestas. Okay, well, thank you again, Gabriela, for your presentation. And again, I would like to encourage the participants to continue to post your questions so we can address them on the Q&A. And now let's move on to the presentation by Rajiv Bahar with India GIZ India, who will share with us the most recent interventions by the government of India and the Indo-German cooperation initiatives targeting the migrant population. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Nancy, and good evening from India, and good morning and good afternoon to different parts of the world where you sit right now. I'll share with you a very dynamic and quick, rapidly changing context and situation vis-a-vis COVID-19 in India. Next slide, please. So if we look at the current situation, there's the number of cases, almost 500,000 positive cases. And the good part is that almost 280,000 out of these have recovered. The fatalities so far have been a little bit on the low side with about 15,000 plus, rapidly rising. But then remember, India is also a country with about 1.3 billion people. So this is still on a rise and we don't know how it will move forward. Next slide, please. If you see this slide on the right-hand side, you would see that actually in the map of India, no state has been spared. Of course, different levels of impacts have happened to different states. And this is just a picture as of now. Every day new areas are coming into infection and are being managed by the government and various agencies. But the fact remains that the initial estimates are showing that 8 out of 10 Indian households have lost sources of income. The lower middle class has been hit quite strongly because it's sort of dependent on sources of income which are affected by lockdown. So these are around manufacturing, services, and all. The rural area with agriculture part has not been economically hit, but it has been hit in terms of now the return migrants who are coming in. And on the left-hand side, you will see that the unemployment and the labor force participation rate, which started falling steeply around March, has started recovering a bit. Now, this, of course, is newspaper-based data and still to be verified, but it also shows that to some extent, different other opportunities are being created, or some sort of employments are being created, and we'll try to go a bit deeper into that. Next slide, please. Now, what has been the larger context of internal migration in India on which COVID has imposed itself? So the numbers from the census that we did in 2011 show that almost 453 million people in India are migrants, and out of which 120 million migrated for work, employment, or business. And this migration rate keeps growing at about 4.5% annually, of course, depending on the stage and growth of the economy, which has been moving till late, until quite recently. Now, one of the largest, biggest movements, if you would really find very interesting, is right in the middle, is the red chart where women have been the highest numbers, and this is because of marriage. They move from their village to another area, and that's another form of internal migration. But also businesses, education, work have been the other factors. Next slide, please. Now, what the map on the left-hand side shows which parts of India are the hotspots for migration. So if you really look at the deep red or brown ones, these are usually the hill areas where the employment opportunities are poor. The tribal and the coastal belts, again, where the economic opportunities beyond a certain point are poor. And also the areas of Rajasthan to the west, which are desert. So from here, basically three core or basic types of migrations have happened or have been happening. One, of course, is the distress migration. So seasonally or across the years, depending on the water stress, limited amount of land, low levels of literacy and skills, people migrate on short-term or seasonal basis. So they, for the main agriculture season, they stay in the villages. When the monsoons are able to give them the monsoon crop. With lack of irrigation for the rest of the year, they would migrate out and do other things. This is more driven by natural resources and crisis. The other group is the aspirational opportunity-seeking migrants, mostly youth, who migrate alone to urban areas, and we will also look at where are the key areas they've been worked. And this has mostly happened from Eastern India, where agriculture has reached its limit, and economic industrial opportunities are still developing. And the third type has been a traditional old form of rooted migration, where people have historically moved from source areas to destinations like looms, gem business in Gujarat, and all sorts of industries which have been there for decades and decades. The first one is in the red because this has been the most vulnerable and worst hit section because of COVID-19, and we'll go a little further into this. The next slide, please. Now, what happened in March? So the real COVID outbreak in India was around 22nd of March. Immediately, a lockdown was initiated by the government as a complete lockdown, and there were 4 phases of it till quite recently, till almost till mid-May. And this totally dislocated the migrant population. Almost 1/3 of these short-term migrants, which had been working in construction sector, and then the contractors did not have business, could not have incomes, and were then in a doldrums. And as the situation did not go back to normalcy and kept getting worse and worse with the shutdowns, hundreds of thousands of these migrants have started moving back and have been moving back to their rural areas where they've come from. So this whole return migration. And it is estimated that almost 30% of the total migrants population will be coming back to rural areas to create totally new pressures and maybe some new opportunities, but mostly new pressures in areas from where they had historically moved out because of lack of opportunities. Next slide, please. Now, what has been the national level response? And so there have been, we would share 4 key types of initiatives taken by the government. So apart from the philanthropic and the social support that has been happening in terms of feeding, supporting, giving part incomes, what have been the mainstream government responses? And these are 4. The first one is what is called the Self-Sufficient India campaign. The second one is the largest social protection program in the world called Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Generation Program. Third one is again a new program initiated for COVID-19 called Employment Welfare Scheme for the Poor. And then we will also share that the Indo-German cooperation, what are the sort of things that we do which are also helping with the COVID response. Next slide, please. Now, this big self-reliance program has done a few things. It has added about another 4.8 billion euros worth of funding to the social protection program, realizing that a huge number of people that have moved to rural areas would need to look for jobs and work within the social protection program. Almost 1.2 billion euros worth of direct benefit transfers have happened into the zero balance accounts of women. Almost about 6 euros per month is going directly as a cash support into these. And these zero balance accounts were opened by the government for poorest of the poor about 5 years back. Another 1.93 billion euros worth of support is going through a program called PM Farmers Plan, which is basically a direct benefit support to almost about 71 euros per month to very small and marginal farmers. So this is direct basic income sort of a support. So you're seeing different instruments that are part of such an approach. The fourth one is about 330 million euros worth of support to old people, widows, and disabled. So these are continuing government welfare schemes, and these have been bolstered and additional money put on it. Apart from this, about 35 billion euros worth of collateral-free loans have been provided or are made available for 4.5 million micro, small, and medium enterprises. Now, of course, there are systemic and ecosystem challenges around accessing this, but this at least has been provided as a straight-off support. So instead of giving grants or subsidies, the loans have been given as collateral free. Now, the second program is this Employment Welfare Scheme for the Poor, and I will go to this in the next slide. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So sorry, we need to go back. So basically, it's a program where what is happening is that almost in 16 states, in 6 states, work is being done. And I'll come back to this again a little later. But this is again a second very important program and directly links to rural responses. Next slide, please. The third one is this very old and tested social protection program of Government of India, which seeks, and it's a statutory act to be followed by any government that comes in. It seeks to provide livelihood security of up to 100 days in every financial year to any household in rural areas whose adult members ask for unskilled manual work. So till date, starting from almost 2006 till now, Government of India has spent about 67 billion euros worth, and almost 12 billion euros is planned for this year. So earlier it was about 7 billion euros, and another 4.8 billion euros were added because of COVID. This actually reaches out to about 138 million families. So actually, the sheer scale and the size of and the diversity and complexity of these issues in India hides the real story behind these numbers. So reaching out to such a huge number, and out of which almost more than half have been traditionally the active workers. So people register, but more than half as and when they need come to work. The interesting thing is almost 55% of the work generated is done by women, and 20% is by people from vulnerable communities and sections like tribal and marginalized communities. Next slide, please. So what happened to this social protection program? Immediately, it was not stopped after an initial lull. It was again started. Social distancing norms were introduced. There's a film in the end. If we can get to show you, we'll show it to you. The focus was now on infrastructural creation and durable livelihood infrastructure with a focus on water conservation and water management. This is summer period. The key requirement of people is water for irrigation. So work to be done, more work to be done under social distancing, but with a focus on water conservation and water management. Also, the wages were increased just before COVID, and that has also helped. And additionally, there's a very prolonged process of or a tested process of enrolling people, but in this case, exemptions have been made and people can easily ask for work. Next slide, please. This is the program that I was initially referring to, worth about 5.8 billion euros. It focuses on 6 states where the return migrants are supposed to be or are expected to be the highest numbers. And 116 districts have been selected where within 125 days, this money has to be targeted and spent and to create durable rural infrastructure, including modern facilities like internet, because it is believed that a lot of the social enterprises and the work around social services will also be driven by internet growth in rural India. Skill mapping of rural migrants is being done to connect them to match and patch with the right opportunities as they open up. About 25 categories of works and activities, mostly around roads, housing, creches, panchayat buildings, local government buildings, livelihood assets and community complexes are to be built. And this is actually led by the Ministry of Rural Development, but it brings together 12 different ministries and departments at the national level in a mission mode to really deliver this in a quick way to take care of the problems that the return migrants would be facing in their villages. Next slide, please. Now, what have we been doing? I mean, we've seen the context that more than half of the return migrants are unskilled and semi-skilled. Therefore, NREGA or the social protection is the best way to quickly connect them. And this pressure will also lead to further distress on natural resources, water, as well as also need to work more to create livelihoods, because these are the only available things mostly in the villages. Next slide, please. Now, what are we doing? So we have this bilateral program called Water Security and Climate Adaptation, which we partner with this Ministry of Rural Development that I mentioned and Ministry of Water Resources. So we've developed this composite water resource management framework in which now at a district level, at a sub-basin level, the water demand and supply can be planned and various interventions could be planned by the district authorities working very closely with all the water related departments and communities. We've trained about more than 1,600 staff in 5 states, and mind you, these 5 states constitute about 37% of India's geographical area and almost 39% of the population. So pilots are being done here, resource centers have been established, and already within about 8 months or 6 months, 13,000 panchayats or local village bodies have sent in their plans. So what is important, that these are long-term perspective plans with focus on water, and therefore these now provide an immediate possibility for this additional labor which has now come into the village, and also the additional money that is available to connect with each other and to be hopefully implementing not just wasted works, but actually works which lead to NRM and livelihood resuscitation. Next slide, please. The other interesting one is a project that two GIZ projects have done, where we have leveraged again the money available through social protection to work with self-help groups of women to create horticulture community gardens. And here it's not just providing income to women through sale of short-term vegetables and long-term fruit trees, but also it is providing nutrition to about 20,000 people. And there have been stories of almost a lot of the money has been actually leveraged from the government schemes. and therefore it's very replicable and scalable. But the most interesting part is this creates the nutritional self-reliance in the village, especially with some of the most vulnerable families, so that when they're hit by pandemics like this, their ability to manage themselves in absence and with inability to buy vegetables and other nutrition, they have the self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. Now, it's not easy. So there are still, if we have to now take some of this into implementation, how to quickly strengthen the rural livelihoods which have been affected by the breakdown of value chains, supply chains, how to get the sustainability back, and also to be able to bring in maybe a large number of return migrants who have now become not just people who are sending money home, but who are additional mouths to feed. So, and their aspirations may be different. So how do you skill them? How do you bring them together? This is something which that Atmanirbhar Bharat and the Garib Kalyan Yojana would also be trying to do. The other important thing is, how do you quickly help the district authorities to find activities which can be done in social distancing norm, and where then this uptake of labor, providing work for people and them being able to earn wages, is leading to sustainable assets and future resilience to long sustained COVID sort of impact. So how do we help people to deal with the longevity of this potential pandemic? The third one, which is very difficult, is how do you really ensure safety at work sites on the ground and monitor social distancing? And no satellite technology can work here. And so there's a lot of work that we're trying to figure out how to help the government to do this. But this is a challenging area. It should not lead to further infection spread. But I think the big lesson out of all this, which was theoretically known to all of us, is that while COVID may have come in, but just before COVID, we had a huge cyclone which affected one part of India. Another part of India is going through a locust attack. We're also having droughts in different parts of the country right now. So if you really see, not just the way our climate is, but also given the diversity of the huge complexity of India, there are always some sort of pandemics happening all the time. So how do you create an overarching system which is able to take care of multiple simultaneous disasters? And while social protection abilities and availability, like MGNREGA and mission mode responses are there, can we think of a more comprehensive and structured way of dealing with this? And there have been discussions on climate-based insurance and other possibilities, but this is an area I think India will also be looking more seriously at. Next slide, please. And I think that's the last one. Yes, Nancy, right time. So Nancy, do you think we have time to quickly play this video? Because you were to come in at 1 minute.
Yes.
Would we
yes,
have time? Oh, okay. Mika, can you please help me by playing this video?
Rajiv, I think what Kirin mentioned was we'll probably not be able to play this, but she's going to share the link in the chat with everyone, so then they can go ahead and see it.
Okay, so this is just motivational film made by the government, and this is being played at a village level to get the MGNREGA workers to come out of their fears and to be motivated also to work and under what conditions of work, things like that. So that is all from my side. Over to you, Nancy, and if there are any questions, we'll try to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Yeah, we have supplied the link to that video, so participants can see it later. And I certainly appreciate your intervention here, as it's been, India has now become an example of this labor market component with the livelihoods, as we had primarily focused on emerging practices that had been more on social assistance and cash based, but we're glad to be able to share others. So thank you for your intervention, and we hope to continue the discussion on the Q&A. So now I will invite Virginia Negro from IOM, who will comment on the country experiences that have been shared today from Ecuador and India, and in general from our webinar on June 16, which we introduced the subject of displacement, forced displacement migration within social protection. And she would also provide just a broader perspective on the challenges and the areas of opportunity in migration governance, so we can work towards protection and inclusion of migrant workers. So you have the floor now, and we're happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank to Gabriela and to Rajiv for their presentations. And before going to mine, I wanted to they showed us the context of two different countries, and I wanted to resume a little bit what we saw today, right now. So for this webinar, we showcase practical responses also in the past webinars in different continents, including adjustment to existing cash-paid intervention and the use of complementary shock responsive social safety net. In this session, we've talked about labor migration, migrants, particularly in lower paid jobs, and these are most migrants that move for labor, work in the informal sector, and are not only prone to the health threats of COVID right now as host population, but may also face particular vulnerabilities due to their condition of mobility, as we saw in the past examples, Colombia also, and Africa, and through this webinar. So it's important to emphasize not just the vulnerability of people on the move, but also of people forced to return to their home countries. Like, for example, the example of both Ecuador and India were very punctual in this, no? So tens of millions of migrant workers forced to return home because of the COVID pandemic right now, after losing their job, face unemployment and poverty in their home countries. As we see also here in Mexico with a lot of Central American people, no? As containment measures ease, millions of migrant workers may be required to return home to low and middle income countries where labor markets were fragile before the COVID-19 and are further weakened by the additional strain of high levels of unemployment and business disruption. So in addition, their families will suffer financially from the loss of their remittances normally sent to them. This is another very big question that we have to think about, no? In an ILO research in more than 20 countries indicates that many millions are expected to return home for the loss of their job in the host country. So most of their home countries have very limited scope to reintegrate such large numbers of people. And another side effect of this crisis is that most of the 14% of respondents who reporting rely on remittance payments from relatives abroad will be no longer receiving remittances or receiving a very reduced amount. And this is something that we also have with government to consider. As part of the reintegration assistance, it's fundamental to develop alternative assistance schemes. In some countries, for example, IOM is planning to use reintegration assistance to provide cash grants to returnees for 3 months. Alongside these strategies is the work that we both are doing in other, this is just an example, but I think it's very interesting, in countries like Belgium with FEDASIL and the French Office of Immigration and Integration, which we have partnered in implementing AVR programs, but with a very strong focus on labor inclusion of migrants and their reintegration in the labor market. So our task now is to improve policies that will protect migrant workers in the host countries as well in the country of origin, because they often work in essential industry in our countries or in the host countries, and the others that will want to return, we have to convert them in our source for economic recoveries in these countries of origin. So in both cases, the key to unlocking this potential is the access, as we saw, to social protection, as well as the establishment of rights-based and orderly return and reintegration system with proper skills recognition that would facilitate better job and skill matching. increasing so productivity for national industries. Migrants worker can bring knowledge and capital, which can reinforce the economy of both countries of origin and hosting country. And now I will pass to the presentation. I hope you can see to show you some more examples. Can you see the screen?
Yes,
Yes.
we can see the presentation.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't. Okay. So one aspect that I think it's very interesting right now at the moment is to be able to share this experience because of, yes, we have specificities and we have really different local context, but this global crisis is also, we can say, a globalizing crisis. The fact is that we can see common trends in migration corridors, and we can see which are the weaknesses and the challenges of public policies and governance in a very wide way. And because the impact of this pandemic is global. So then we, in this presentation, I wanted to also have a little part of proposals or policies proposal, and to just have a deeper background. Here, well, we know that migration is a global phenomenon, and we have so many corridors. And here is one in Mexico, because I'm in Mexico right now, is one of the most important also. So it's important also to think about this case, the Mexican case. And we can see, as we saw in both presentation, Gabriela and Rajiv were mentioning the feminization of labor migration, and how a lot of migrant workers are in a irregular situation, and so they need to work in the formal economy, and they cannot insert in the formal one, having more difficulties to social protection even, and to have a labor and employment condition that are not good standards. And so the point, as I will repeat it a lot of time, is social security and protection of migrant workers in this very moment is really important. And I just wanted to highlight the example of Italy, because right now, after I think that the last program of regularization of migrants were in the 90s, and right now with the pandemic, the government decided to implement the regularization of, I think it's 600,000 migrants that are working in irregular condition in essential activities like the agro industry or the domestic work or the health system in Italy. So this is a very important moment to think and reflect about social security and protection of migrants' work. So here we have like the impact of COVID-19 in a lot of different aspects that concern the migrants' lives. So not just in their employment, but as we see, as we know, there is an intersectionality of questions that concern migrant workers and their life. So working condition, but also xenophobia, and also health, their families, as we saw remittances. Here I wanted to just have a little list of this impact, you know. So it can lead also to very very dangerous and very problematic situation like debt bondage and human trafficking, you know. So we saw also in a research that IOM is making that here right now the impact of COVID is effectively leading to an increase of human trafficking because of the increasing of vulnerabilities of migrants. So another time I'm going to common patterns and weaknesses and challenges of public policies and governance in this very moment. So we can see how gaps and fragmentation in regional integration agreements are very visible right now. And I'm just thinking, for example, in the example of Guatemala and Mexico, no? A weak focus on labor and rights in institution and migratory governance, the same lack of participation of the actors involved in the labor field in the consultation processes on migration. And here I wanted to be very specific and to also, and to also highlight the important role of the private sector. We didn't discuss it so much right now, but I think we have to really think about the social and responsibility, the social role of the private sector right now, and its responsibility, but also the way in which this perspective of the migration and development perspective can also help really the reactivation of economy and also the private sector. And so the absence of intergovernmental commissions with the participation of the ministries of labor, these things are all interconnected. A weak presence of market institution on immigration issues and an insufficient participation of migrant workers in unionization and collective bargaining processes. And also this, we have to really think about it, because I think that today was, just this morning I read a news regarding some jornaleros, sorry, I don't have the word, some worker that Mexican workers in the United States were finally their union was recognized, sorry, by the government. So this is also very important. Some policy considerations, just to be quick, and I don't want to, I wanted just to summarize a little bit all these experiences and then to be able to have a dialogue with you. So as we saw, including migrant people in the social protection system is the most important focus right now, facilitating their access to social protection schemes in the context of the current crisis. And in this sense, we have to think about the passage from the informal economy of a lot of this population and from their irregular status to a formal economy with a regular status. So this is a very important point we have to think about. And thinking about including migrants people in the national COVID-19 response of host countries, we have to think about short-term, of course, shock response, and think about their working and living condition, complying with occupational safety and health standards, and informating them on COVID-19. This is, of course, something that we need to implement, but also thinking about a medium long-term integration of this population in order to extend social protection to migrant workers and their families, and to focus on developing and strengthening universal and inclusive national social protection systems, including social protection floors and establishing social security and labor agreements. So here are some measures that we can suggest as to extend existing national schemes to uncovered groups of migrant workers, ease administrative procedures. This is very important also. Adapt or relax eligibility criteria, such as the length of employment, duration of stay, or minimum contribution period. And this I refer a lot to like visa, this unilateral, bilateral, multilateral agreements for seasonal workers. It's something we really have to rethink about in a lot of countries right now with the pandemic. Consider measures to ensure that access to social protection benefits are not interrupted, such as the extension of visas, work and residence permits, amnesties, and more flexible administrative procedures or exception to existing immigration rules and conditions. So here we had, for example, the example of Italy, but also the example of Portugal. Right now, well, Italy, I'm kind of, because I'm Italian, and I know how it was difficult also for the public opinion to have this kind of measure, thinking about a government that who is very is going very in an anti-immigrant way. So to think about this measure of amnesty right now, it's just so clear that it was something to protect these people, but also the host community, in this special moment of the pandemic. So I feel that it's really, really an example that speaks to us about how the importance of including migrant workers in the formal economy and to regularize them. Another example is from New Zealand and its economic response package. Announced that international seasonal migrant workers are entitled to government funding if they fall sick and have to isolate themselves while working in New Zealand, or cannot work because their employer's business is affected by the lockdown. So this is about the opening of the response package to this kind of migrants. Another example is from Ireland. But there are a lot of in Europe, like a lot of countries are working in this sense. About return and reintegration schemes, that I think is another point that we also have to really think about, because millions of migrant workers may be required to return home, want to return home, and most of the time their home are low and middle income countries where the labor markets were fragile, as we said before the COVID-19 outbreak, and now further weakened by the additional strain of high levels of unemployment and business disruption due to the pandemic. So families can suffer financially from the loss of remittances normally sent to them. Reintegration plans must include skills development and recognition. So in these two senses, for example, IOM is working on cash-based interventions for the loss of remittances of these families, but also in the reintegration plans, they are working we are working in with the Ministry of Labor to include this skill development and skill recognition for this population, with a focus on youth and females. because of their special vulnerability in this moment. I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening to it. So another thing that we have to also think about is the financial inclusion. And this I wanted to point it out because it's something we are really working here in Mexico. And it's something that at the very beginning we thought it was kind of not something so central, but we are seeing how financial inclusion and some barriers that we can find to financial inclusion for migrants people are really an obstacle to their integration in the labor and formal market, even when they are regular, no? So we really need to improve national strategies and regulation and international standards to have a consumer and data protection for institution and for people, but that can be sustainable, no? To also implement a lot financial literacy and financial education, and bridging humanitarian response and development approaches. So just to end, another thing that I wanted to have this little moment of publicity, but I think it's very important, this kind of work that we are making, and we are making it as an international organization with a lot of partners, including civil societies and governments. And is a work that we are doing in implementation of the 2030 agenda and on their framework of indicators and statistical data to monitor the progress of migrant policies in the countries. So this is like a need assessment that we are making as IOM, and we are doing it inside the migration governance framework. That is something that we developed to help have a panoramic of the situation in the countries about their implementation and their level of development in migration policies. So this is something that we also can propose to different countries to see where they are, and then from this to help them to feel their problematics and to solve their obstacles in this sense. So I don't know, I think I don't see the Nancy, so I think I'm on time. And I wanted to thank you, and for every additional information, I will share in the chat now my email, and hoping to be able to solve your questions if you have some. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Virginia, for your intervention and sort of connecting the country experiences, but also sharing additional ones to have a broader perspective of other aspects of inclusion, and also as it relates to migration governance, but it's all interconnected also with access to social protection programs. So I will invite all our panelists to join us again with their cameras on, but before the Q&A questions, we have received a few questions here, but keep them coming here on the chat. And if we don't have time to address them all in the time we have left, we plan to have a Q&A document available on the social protection online community as well. But before that, I also would like to announce that we have a poll to get feedback on the simultaneous translation. We have it both in English and Spanish. So if you can take a moment to give us your evaluation of that service available. I'll switch quickly into Spanish to announce this to our audience. Aquí tenemos una encuesta también para que nos den su retroalimentación sobre el servicio de traducción. También si lo pueden contestar en este momento. Okay, so thank you for that from the audience. Gabriela, if you can also join us here on the panel. We do have a couple questions, and I'll begin with one question here directed to Gabriela from on the Ecuador experience in Spanish, but I'll try to translate that in English as well. This is from Regine, who's observing that there has been some progress at the constitutional and legislative level with the recognition of the rights of migrants in Ecuador, including the Ley Orgánica de Movilidad Humana, or this universal citizenship. And so the question is, how does this progress, how is this progress reflected in increasing coverage of social protection measures so that they can include migrants, persons with a migration status. So if you can elaborate a little bit on how, with these advances at the legislative level, how do they translate on actual access to, or ensuring that the coverage also includes migrants as well?
Okay, yes. In the last years, there has been relevant achievements in terms of policies, laws, and regulations related to migrants.
Gabriela, I think we're having a little bit of trouble with the video or your audio. Not sure if you continue to have an issue with that, you might need to close the video and see if we can hear you better. If not, we can wait till the connection becomes a little bit better. Okay, so I guess we'll come back to Gabriela and see if the connection improves. And if any of you experience that issue, you can turn off your videos. But we'll continue with Rajiv. I think there was also some questions. One question from Ritesh, we had directed to you, Rajiv. There was an opinion on he mentioned that there is a challenge of how we can graduate employment schemes to address enhancing ecosystem resilience capacity, as you had mentioned. And there's going to be additional stress on resources. And what's your opinion on how this can be addressed? These challenges can be addressed.
Thank you for that question, Ritesh, and also Nancy. I think the key is this whole approach of green recovery. And the green recovery is around a different model where whatever resources, either in terms of money or in terms of wage work, are being utilized not just to strengthen the service infrastructure, but also invest in natural resource, agriculture, allied occupation-based investments, so that the individual families are having more from their own homesteads. They're also less dependent on forests and other ecosystem supports that are around, so that rather than that people go back and suddenly the deforestation increases, we create local livelihoods around what is available in the villages and create new set of ecosystem services for which people and or economies or local value chains are able to pay. So I think it'll require us to work in a very granular manner. These would be different solutions for very different areas. For example, in the hills, it will be very different solutions. Deserts will be very different. The Deccan Trap and the Plateau part will be different. Coastal areas will be different. So I think this will require great innovation at a local level. And if we don't do this, the chances are that a long-drawn pandemic of this nature, not just with local impacts, but also global value chains being affected, and the shift also within the economies, the resilience has to be built very deep in, and therefore the ecosystem side of it should be safeguarded, but also leveraged if possible to create some of these potential opportunities locally in the future. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Gabriela, are you back with us? Is your audio okay? So I wanted to turn the floor over to you to address the
Yes.
initial question we had. Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yes. we
Yes.
can hear you.
So, okay, the answer is that yes, in fact, in the last years, there has been relevant achievements in terms of policies, laws, and also regulations related to migrants and refugees in Ecuador. And also in terms of the incorporation and recognition of their rights, such as health, education, social protection, for example. In fact, the government of Ecuador has several times has expressed the commitment and also the will to host migrant population and to respect their rights. Also, the government at the national level, as well as the local level, has allocated some resources to assist migrant population. But in the practice, there are some challenges in terms of the capacity to provide all these services to migrant population, considering especially that there are already limitations to guarantee the exercises of these rights for the national population. So, of course, it is more challenging to guarantee the exercise of these rights for migrants and refugees. But of course, the government is committed and is trying to put all the efforts trying to assist this population in the country, the most vulnerable families related to migrant population.
Okay. Thank you, Gabriela. I would like to also share another question that the entire panel can answer. Because this deals with all the different country examples that have been discussed, and in relation to data that can be collected on labor movement. So the specific question is, well, how in these countries are there any robust databases on this? And as Ritish had shared with us, that without that, how can you formulate different schemes to be efficient? And so if each of you can sort of comment on this to the extent that they can share with us about the data collected on the either return migrants or internal migrants as well. So if you want to start, Virginia, we can go with you first.
Thank you. This is a very good topic, and I think that it's something really that we can't forget, and we have to work a lot in this sense. In the case of Mexico, I think it's a really interesting case because we have a lot of institutions that are providing these data. We also have academic institution that works with government to provide data on irregular migration, that it's called DMIF, and it's working in both borders. It's very interesting that all these data that we have then are not used because we have like a kind of disconnection between institutions. And this is what we need here in Mexico to articulate all this data, all these institutions, and to provide a very clear panoramic horizon in this sense that has to be actualized, that has to be like in the very specific time we are, and to be shared and with the private sector also. So we have to include also the private sector in this kind of process of data making, and not just data making, but also the interpretation then of this data. So this is just my contribution here. We don't just have to think about the production of this kind of yes, information. It's really important, but then even if and even when we have this kind of production, we need to articulate and to make it significant. So this is something, for example, that in Mexico we are working with the institution to do in this sense.
Thank you. Rajiv?
Yeah, Nancy, thanks. That's a great question, actually. And I guess the real crux for me is that who's responsible for registering and for getting this database started. So while of course there's a state responsibility, in India it becomes a bit complex because there's a federal government and there are provincial governments. And therefore, what role does a federal government play? A lot of the sectors of work, especially around agriculture and local industries, are all state subjects. So how do states cooperate with each other? Why do they cooperate with each other on such data? So this has not been the reason so far. The second obvious point of data collection could be the employers, but given the fact that a lot of the growth of economy and workforces since about last 10-12 years has more been in the informal sector, the interest of employers to really register formally informal employees or workers is very low. And many of the workers themselves is a third motive force of generating. If there are no large-scale insurance schemes or programs or supports for them, which are totally targeted, and their own incentive to really register is not there. So I would see that the real missing part in this is that the governments probably would have to start this. The private sector or the employers are too sectorally divided, too geographically driven, and would not be able to do. So there are institutions in India like CMIE and others who forecast. We have a census every 10 years which tries to predict, but the internal movement of migrants is far more complex. So one thing, of course, that we see for the first time is that because of COVID-19 and the need for migrants to move from destination back to their source places did cause governments to start speaking to each other about numbers. But this can be actually built into a framework, and a full database is the next leap, for which I think right now there are only discussions happening.
Thank you. Gabriela, do you have any comments on this question on data?
Yes, actually, just to mention that in the case of Ecuador, we don't have a robust database on labor movement. Actually, all these processes to generate relevant and updated data are always challenging, as we know. There are, of course, some investigations and studies in specific topics, but we don't have yet a database on labor movement. Actually, there are some initiatives also with the private sector to gather this information. So we expect to have soon some relevant information related to this topic.
Perfect. Well, I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to just pose one last question because I find it relevant on this multi-actor role with the private sector as well that Virginia highlighted on her presentation, particularly because we also have livelihood components, and Rajiv, you had mentioned about this effort to match skills of different migrant populations. And so if you can comment on how these sector partnerships, particularly with the private sector, can be propelled, given the experiences at your country level, and any other concluding remarks that you want to make on your presentation. And after that, we'll conclude the panel. And so we can begin with Rajiv, if you want to start with that.
Yeah, okay, Nancy. So I think this is a good question. And actually what we are finding is that the level of interest of the employer or the private sector is directly related to the matrix of high risk, high income, and low income and low risk. So you will find that there are sectors of industry where especially the skilled and highly skilled labor is very important. And there, whether it's in construction, whether it's pharmaceutical manufacturing, whether it's car manufacture, whether it is horticulture plantations with a very clear value chain and a huge demand internationally and nationally, the employers in the private sector is directly negotiating with migrant workers, is sending buses to villages where they are in other states, bringing them back. There have been stories also of gem industry flying back the return migrants who had gone back in planes. So, but this is only happening for a niche of highly skilled labor, which is contested and is really needed. I think for the others, there are examples of states like Kerala, where the agriculture is predominantly dependent on foreign and external labor. There, the local governments have been very positive. They've made sure that not just the employer, but also the local government has created conditions where the migrants have been safe, provided food, provided safety, and have actually not left. So I think this is very contextual to each private sector player. But I think they're also becoming more interested in their labor going forward, and I think this would reset, just like the social protection program in India reset the wage labor rates, especially for women who are getting paid half of what the men used to do. So this created a total new renegotiation of labor rates. Similarly, I have a feeling that this would lead to some level of, even if informal, not formal, contractual, but some renegotiation for different classes of migrants. But the unskilled ones will remain vulnerable. I have a fear with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Gabriela, any comments that you might have on this role of the private sector, especially with humanitarian organizations and access to livelihood opportunities and other social assistance? So yeah, we can move on to you, and any other concluding remarks.
Okay, yes. Well, I think it's very important to incorporate the private sector to raise awareness about the situation and needs, but also to implement initiatives to include migrant population in all this, in this productive sector. And as a conclusion, I will say that it is not possible for any organization to address all the gaps and all the needs that we know exist in relation to migrant population and refugees. So the only way to make an integral or to provide an integral assistance is to work in a coordinated way between private sector, NGOs, international cooperation, and also with the local governments and national governments. That is the only way we can at least implement some initiatives or some actions to provide a real integral assistance to these families that are suffering, of course.
Thank you for your concluding remarks. And moving on to Virginia, if you want to address this further this questions and other aspects that you want to highlight in your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Nancy. And I totally agree with both colleagues, Rajiv and Gabriela, about the point that they made. I just wanted to be a little bit more precise about like the measures or the activities that we can do with the private sector. So I think that intersectorial roundtables that works permanently are really important. So is the thing that was highlighting Gabriela, the information and raising awareness to have like a good plan of work with private sector on building capacities, because sometimes they are just unaware of the migration theme in general. So we have to raise awareness in this sense, and then to articulate them with the various services that the Ministry of Labor offer in every country in punctual activities like job fairs, like the portal of work, like program of recognition of skills and development of skills that have all the same goal to integrate also vulnerable and population to the labor market, and sometimes even the people, even migrant people, don't know that they can access to these services. So this is very important to also be able to give this kind of information with the government and with the private sector. And thank you very much for this webinar. It was very, very interesting.
Thank you all, and thank you to our wonderful panelists for your presentations, inputs, and answers. We didn't have time to address all the questions, but we will do so in a Q&A follow-up that the audience can find on socialprotection.org. So therefore, we encourage you to join the online community. And again, to our participants, thank you for your attention and valuable comments and questions that you post to our panelists. I want to give special thanks to the socialprotection.org team for making this webinar happen, and also for the simultaneous translation and all the support that goes into making these webinars available. I also, I believe we will have a survey for the 7th webinar, so I would ask the audience to take some time to answer questions so we can have more feedback on and be able to improve these webinars, and just again to encourage you to join the online community, Social Protection Responses to COVID, to keep updated on future webinars and also engage in discussions and debates that contribute to further initiatives on these materials and webinars available. So yeah, stay tuned for the next webinars that are coming up. And thank you again, Gabriela, Rajiv, and Virginia for your expertise and the time that you've given us to be with us. And thank you for the audience for joining us today on this webinar. Have a great day.
Much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.